Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture, the show where we discuss science, technology and culture in its myriad of forms. My name's Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern to talk about Twitter. Because it's been in the news lately, and at least in Australia at least, and of course around the world with many other things, but we've got a very interesting story to discuss. So how are we today, Steve?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I'm looking forward to the release of the next iPhone in a month. But apart from that, very happy to talk.
Are you actually going to take the plunge this time? Because you've stuck with the 4S for a long time, haven't you?
Well, I could, and I'll just say this quickly. The Sony Xperia M5 looks pretty interesting as well as a camera.
Absolutely. Actually, I should probably rely on you more for, stepping out and trying different things, because I think I tend to stick with things until I find I'm totally convinced that something better is out there. But I think you tend to try things a little bit more, I think, from what I've seen.
I tend to try them, but then stay on the old technology as long.
Oh, well, make sure you put Twitter on there at whichever one you get. So, as we alluded to, we're talking about Twitter, and just to give you a bit of a summary, the power of Twitter to organise a campaign at short notice was on display in Melbourne, my hometown, in recent days, when an operation conducted by the Australian Border Force in conjunction with Melbourne Police was cancelled following a huge storm of protests in the city. Essentially what happened is the Border Force sent out a press release in the morning. It was picked up within half an hour on Twitter. It made the rounds, and the rest is history. Basically, they were protesting in the streets. It became headline news, and the whole thing had to be called off. Well, the interesting thing is they said Melbourne Police called it off out of the interest of public safety. So this is another example.
That, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. It's an example of how if something really catches on fire on Twitter, real things start to happen from it.
Yeah, well, we've seen this, I guess, already with the Occupy Now movements, and a lot of the activism can really be generated. And if it's something that people believe strongly in, well, then it only takes a few tweets and everyone knows about it.
It's just so easy to. I mean, that's part of the I guess the benefits of Twitter is that it's so quick and so easy to disseminate a message that you can just get it out there very quickly. Now, obviously, this particular incident might have been a lot even easier to spread the word, because essentially it was customs officials in conjunction with police were out to. Well, the suggestion, if you were to condense it down to 140 characters, was that they're hitting the streets and they're going to check your papers, so to speak, if by walking out on the street. So that is a message that can so easily be picked up on Twitter and just circulated really quickly.
And there's a lot of public sentiment about that as well. So that can be exploited straight away. And I suspect, or I'd like to know, if the Victorian Police did abandon it, do they have a strategy? Did they go through a checklist and say, look, we've got so much general public out there now, our presence is only going to, lead to this happening, or
altercations or whatever. Yeah.
Well, if 30% of people feel very strongly about this matter and then they all come out into the streets, you really want to disband the operation before that happens, I imagine.
Yeah, there's all sorts of connotations of what might have happened if it had continued to go forward, because it wouldn't have surprised me that with the amount of protesters in the streets, they probably would have been following all of those border protection people around and giving them so much grief that they wouldn't have been able to do their job anyway.
But it's a great example of activism, as you say, how quickly you can spread that, I guess, that sentiment. And then, if people feel strongly about it, they'll respond. And we've seen this before, but
I guess for us individually, it's because it's so close to home for us. I guess it's a real example we can see straight away. I mean, we've seen ones that are probably further away overseas, but to actually see it here was not necessarily surprising in the sense of, we understand that that's happened, but when you actually see it actually happening in front of you, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's a matter. I mean, it's a matter that you wonder how it will develop in the future, you know, and it always comes back to the same arguments. Should Twitter regulate itself? Should Twitter stop that happening?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that couldn't happen on Facebook because you couldn't spread it freely throughout your network, and not without boosting your post. So,
so you pay for it, then yeah.
But Twitter doesn't use that model yet, and probably won't. So it just makes you wonder, like, you know, should it be regulated? Will it? Will there be an argument that it should be regulated in this sort of instance?
And maybe what responsibility Twitter has as well in how it all functions. Yeah.
I mean, it's a really good question because the topic is a very tricky and emotive one. But assuming that the police just worded it really badly in their press release, then, you know, the fact that their you know, operations can be disrupted like this has all sorts of implications.
Yeah, exactly. We might just expand this out a little bit. I was watching the 7:30 report the other day, and they had author and journalist Jon Ronson speaking on the show, and they were talking about Twitter, so that was nice and convenient for us. So he raised some interesting points about Twitter, and that he said that when he started using it, he really loved it, but then things changed. And just to quote him, what he said here is, he said, "I think it's gone from a place of curiosity and empathy to a place of cold, hard, instant judgment on the scantest evidence on nothing. Somebody will tweet something that has poor phraseology, and the next thing they know, they have become the plaything of hundreds of thousands of people's ideology, and they're just torn apart for nothing." Which, you know, that is the downside of having a system like this. If you've got people that use it to its most positive effect, you get positive results. But it's also inherent in the way the system's designed that it can be used for bad or unintended or, you know, just downright bitchiness and nastiness as well.
Well, I think, I don't know, but it really is an extension of the human mind and a group consciousness. And when people go bad, they go very, very bad. And Twitter's a place where all that negativity can just be just pushed straight out at someone who A, might deserve it, or B, just doesn't deserve it. But either way, doesn't make it right.
Well, I mean... sorry, I was just going to say, just when you're saying, say an example of a person that doesn't deserve it, he was referring to a woman called Justine Sacco who, just before she got on a plane to Cape Town, she tweeted, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white." Then she gets on the plane, switches her phone off, and by the time she comes back, the whole thing's gone all over the world, and she's just been totally destroyed. And he's actually saying that's because you're just looking at text, you're not understanding the tone of what she was saying, and she was saying that as almost like a joke to make fun of, well, not make fun of, but to highlight the ridiculousness of such a statement. But because that doesn't come through when you read it just as a piece of text, people take it literally, and then that's where the problem goes.
But you and I have spoken about this before, and the fact that, you know, Twitter has been taken over in those early days by some very intelligent people, and people right up the top of the tree, you know, the reporters, journalists, you know, thinkers, all that sort of thing. Then the lawyers got involved with the first libel suits, and, you know, who said what, and is Twitter a publishing platform, and all that sort of stuff. So Twitter has become something that probably was never intended. It's remarkable.
Well, at what point did it actually become that, you know, people will actually take it as seriously as something they might get from a reputable news organization, for instance?
Well, that's been the big fight. And I think that's Twitter wouldn't want anyone saying what we're saying here today, but I think that's why Twitter is actually in decline now, because these people are coming out and saying, in the old days, you know, I used to have to try and tweet as cleverly as possible, get those 140 characters out, say something funny, insightful and intelligent. I think most of those people are burnt out. I couldn't manage more than 50 tweets like that, and that took me about 3 years. You know, it's like, I really just think that they've lost interest. It's like anything. It's not new. It's not shiny anymore. And then if you say one bad thing and your followers start getting stuck into you, you're like, what hope have you got?
Yeah, none, exactly. Just in that interview too, he was asked if technology was changing the nature of human relationships, how they, prefer to send messages to one another. Especially messaging is actually, I mean, that's almost a topic all on its own. You almost don't need phone calls anymore because, especially with the younger generation that are coming through and just using messaging as their primary platform. And the funny thing is that I'm using, I'm not really big on using huge amounts of messaging, but I'm using a couple of different apps because certain people are using that app over others, and it just makes it easier to do that, and then you kind of get that happening. And I guess Twitter's sort of in there as well. I mean, it's not really directly as a messaging thing, but it is a way to express yourself and your ideas out there.
Well, Twitter's exactly that. It's a commentary. So it relies on news and current events. No one's interested in anything outside of that for instant commentary. And then there's a discussion that happens around that. And that's where everyone has a right to their own opinion. But when those opinions turn bad, it's very, very bad.
Just, I guess, say a final point to finish up on with, again, Ronson. He was saying his last book before his last one was about psychopaths, which was a book called The Psychopath Test, and he says social media is turning us more psychopathic. He says we're like drone strike operators. We don't need to think about the village we've just blown up, or we're like snowflakes who don't need to feel responsible for the avalanche. It's robbing us of our empathy, and it's robbing us of our capacity to distinguish between serious and unserious transgressions. So, it's, I mean, it sounds very sort of inflammatory or strong sounding when he describes it like that, but there's probably a point to it in the sense that, on Twitter, it's easy, maybe you're by yourself at home and, well, you could be with a group, whatever it is. You send out a tweet attacking someone on the other side of the world. It doesn't hurt because you don't see them, but it does hurt somewhere eventually. And then if you snowball that and keep going with it, it's that's where you get the bad things happening.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you might be at home on a day of national significance and decide to tweet some things that sort of go against the grain, and you might have thought you were just speaking your mind, but unfortunately a million people out there took offence and you're in big trouble. So we've seen that happen too.
I'm just wondering, Steve, just with our Twitter feed, all we post is, got a new video, go check it out. And that's all we do. We're kind of boring in the in the traditional sense of Twitter.
I think you might find that boring is the new black in the future.
No, I certainly hope so, where people actually want to just look at something. I'm not saying just ours is decent, but just quality content or a quality message would be something that people would be after, you'd hope.
Exactly. I mean, but it is changing everything, exactly as you're saying. It's changing the way we interact with things. And I think, once upon a time, sports personalities could be very colourful. Now they all trot out the same lines. And I think Twitter is just going to go to that as well. And when that happens, it'll become a very boring place, apart from our Twitter feed and our great content.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure you follow us right now. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. So thanks again for that. The power and triviality of Twitter is always an interesting conundrum and quarry to discuss, and I don't think it's going to get resolved anytime soon, really.
No way at all.
All right, so don't forget our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links there. Follow us on Twitter. That's one of our feeds. Obviously, we've got Facebook and Google Plus as well, so check us out there. Have a look at our audio-video feeds, YouTube, Vimeo. We've got RSS and the like. And if you think anyone's interested in our discussions that we have in SciTech Culture, then recommend that you send them to our website. We'd greatly appreciate that. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.